Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
Jake's birthday was always a big deal. He loved being the center of attention, and honestly, I didn't mind indulging him. This year, I wanted to make it special, so I'd planned something thoughtful, a watch he'd mentioned months ago, and reservations for a cozy dinner, just the two of us. But that plan went out the window when Jake called me 3 days before his birthday. "Hey babe," he said, his voice casual, like he wasn't about to drop a bombshell. "So I invited some friends to my birthday dinner." "Oh," I asked, already feeling a twinge of unease. "How many people?" "Just 10 or so," he said, as if that was nothing. "We're going to that steakhouse downtown. You know, the really nice one." I blinked, gripping the phone tighter. "Wait, you invited 10 people to dinner? At the Vine?" "Yeah," he said, unfazed. "It's going to be great. Everyone's excited." I felt my stomach tighten. The Vine wasn't just nice. It was the kind of place where appetizers alone could cost as much as a week's groceries. "Jake, that's a lot," I said carefully. "Are you sure it's in everyone's budget? That place isn't cheap." He paused, his tone shifting to something lighter, almost teasing. "Oh, don't worry about that. I figured you'd cover it. You know, as my gift." His words hit me like a brick. "Cover it?" I repeated, incredulous. "Yeah," he said, like it was the most natural thing in the world. "You know, it's my birthday. It's not like I'm asking you to buy me a car or anything." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Covering Jake's dinner was one thing, but 10 additional people? At a place like the Vine? That wasn't a gift. It was a financial ambush. "Jake," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "that's a lot of people. And that's going to be an expensive bill." "So?" he said, brushing it off. "You're doing well, right? I mean, you've got that promotion, and you're always talking about saving money. It's not like you can't afford it." His casual dismissal stung. Yes, I had been promoted recently, and yes, I was careful with my finances, but that didn't mean I was a walking ATM. "I don't think I can do that," I said firmly. "I'll pay for you and me, but I'm not covering everyone else." The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. "Are you serious right now?" he said finally. "Yes," I said. He let out a frustrated sigh. "It's my birthday, Lauren. Don't ruin it. This is supposed to be fun. Why are you making such a big deal out of this?" I could feel the anger rising in my chest, but I swallowed it down. "Jake, this isn't about ruining anything. It's about fairness. I didn't agree to pay for a group dinner. That's not what I had planned." "Well, plans change," he snapped. "It's just one night. You can make it up to me." For the first time, I wondered if Jake had always been like this and I just never noticed. Or maybe I had noticed but chosen to ignore it because I loved him. "Fine," I said finally, my voice clipped. "I'll go to the dinner, but I'm only paying for us." "Whatever," he muttered. "Just don't embarrass me." Embarrass him? The irony was almost laughable. That night, I sat in bed, replaying the conversation over and over. Part of me wanted to back out entirely, but another part of me didn't want to create more drama. I told myself that as long as I stuck to my boundary, I'd be fine. Still, I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something was wrong. Not just with the dinner, but with the way Jake had handled the whole situation. What would you do if the person you loved assumed your generosity had no limits? Would you stand your ground or give in for the sake of peace? Let me know, because for me, this dinner was already shaping up to be a disaster. The Vine was just as elegant and intimidating as I remembered, with its dim lighting, leather booths, and a wine list thicker than most novels. As I stepped inside, I felt a knot tighten in my stomach. Jake and his friends were already seated at a large table near the back, laughing loudly over drinks. "There she is," Jake called out, waving me over. His grin was wide, but something about it felt forced, like he was performing for the crowd. "Hey," I said, sliding into the seat he'd saved for me. The table was packed, 11 people total, including Jake. Some faces were familiar from past parties, but others were strangers. I forced a polite smile and exchanged a few hellos as Jake leaned in to kiss my cheek. "You look great," he said. "Thanks," I replied, keeping my tone neutral. I could already feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. The waiter arrived to take drink orders, and Jake's friends didn't hold back. Fancy cocktails, top-shelf whiskeys, even a bottle of champagne for the table, because, as one of them put it, it's Jake's birthday. Let's go all out. I glanced at Jake, hoping for some kind of reassurance, but he was laughing along with the group, basking in the attention. As the night went on, the spinning escalated. Appetizers started arriving: oysters, charcuterie boards, truffle fries. When it came time to order entrees, Jake's friends didn't just choose the regular steaks. They went for the premium cuts, adding lobster tails and sides like it was a feast for royalty. "Get whatever you want, babe," Jake said, nudging me with a grin. It's a special night. I nodded stiffly, ordering a modest chicken dish while the others around me opted for filet mignon and Wagyu beef. Throughout the dinner, I couldn't ignore the growing divide between Jake and me. He was completely in his element, cracking jokes, clinking glasses, and soaking up the praise. Meanwhile, I sat quietly, sipping my water and calculating the damage in my head. When the waiter brought another round of drinks, I leaned over and whispered, "Jake, this is getting out of hand." He waved me off. "Relax, Lauren. It's one night." "It's not just one night," I said through gritted teeth. "This is hundreds, maybe thousands of dollars." "Don't be so dramatic," he said, turning back to his friends. When the dessert menu came out, I knew the moment of truth was approaching. The table ordered an assortment of cakes and soufflés, along with more champagne. Finally, the waiter brought the bill, neatly folded in a black leather booklet. He placed it in front of Jake, who didn't even glance at it. Instead, he slid it toward me with a smile. "Here you go, babe," he said casually. The entire table went quiet. 11 pairs of eyes turned to me. I stared at Jake, my heart pounding. "Are you serious right now?" I asked, my voice low. "It's my birthday," he said, as if that explained everything. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Jake, we talked about this. I'm paying for you and me, not everyone." The silence around the table turned into murmurs of disbelief. "Wait," one of his friends said, leaning forward. "You're not paying for all of us?" "No," I said firmly. "I never agreed to that." Another friend scoffed. "Wow, that's awkward." "Yeah," someone else chimed in. "Kinda cheap, don't you think?" My cheeks burned, but I refused to back down. "I'm happy to celebrate, Jake, but I'm not footing the bill for a group this size." "That's not fair." Jake's expression darkened. "Lauren, seriously? You're making a scene?" "I'm not making a scene," I said, my voice steady. "I'm setting a boundary." He shook his head, leaning back in his chair with a frustrated sigh. "Unbelievable. You couldn't just do this one thing for me?" "This isn't one thing, Jake," I said, my patience wearing thin. "This is a massive expense that you decided to dump on me without asking." "That's not okay." The tension at the table was palpable. Jake's friends exchanged uncomfortable glances, some of them openly glaring at me. One of the women across the table spoke up, her tone icy. "You know, Lauren, if you couldn't afford it, you should have just said so. No need to ruin Jake's night." I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to snap back. Jake leaned forward, his voice low but sharp. "You're embarrassing me right now. Is that what you want?" I met his gaze, my anger finally boiling over. "You embarrassed yourself, Jake. I'm not your wallet, and I'm not going to let you treat me like one." Without waiting for a response, I grabbed my bag and stood up. "Where are you going?" Jake demanded, his voice rising. "I'm done," I said simply. "Happy birthday." And with that, I walked out of the restaurant, leaving behind the stunned silence of Jake and his friends. What would you do if someone you love cared more about appearances than your respect? Would you fight to salvage the relationship, or would you walk away for good? Let me know, because for me, this wasn't just about the dinner. It was about everything that came after. When I got home, the silence in the apartment felt heavier than usual. The dinner had left me emotionally drained, but I wasn't ready for what came next. Jake walked in a few minutes after me, slamming the door behind him. I flinched at the sound, but kept my eyes on the book I was pretending to read on the couch. "Care to explain what that was about?" he snapped, his tone sharp. I set the book down, meeting his glare. "What was about, Jake? The part where I refused to pay for your friends? Or the part where they called me cheap for setting a boundary?" His jaw tightened. "You embarrassed me in front of everyone. On my birthday." I scoffed, shaking my head. "Are you seriously trying to make me the bad guy here?" "Jake, you blindsided me with that dinner. You didn't even ask if I was okay with paying for everyone. You just assumed." "Because it's not a big deal," he shouted. "It's one night, Lauren. One night to show a little generosity. Why do you have to make everything so complicated?" "Generosity?" I repeated, my voice rising. "Generosity is something you offer, Jake, not something you demand. And definitely not something you manipulate your partner into doing because you don't want to look bad in front of your friends." Jake threw his hands up, pacing the room. "You're blowing this way out of proportion." "No," I said firmly, standing up. "This isn't about the dinner anymore. It's about the fact that you think it's okay to use me. That you think I'm just here to make your life easier, no matter how much it costs me, financially or emotionally." His head snapped toward me, his expression hardening. "I've never used you." "Yes, you have." I shot back. "This isn't the first time you've put your wants ahead of my boundaries. You do it all the time, Jake. Remember when I covered rent for 3 months because you said you needed to get back on your feet? Or when I paid for that weekend trip you wanted, even though I said I wasn't sure we could afford it. Those were different, he argued. I needed help, and you said you were fine with it. I wasn't fine with it, I said, my voice breaking slightly. I just didn't want to fight with you. But I can't keep doing this, Jake. I can't keep being the one who sacrifices everything while you take, and take without even asking if I'm okay. For a moment, he said nothing, but then he let out a bitter laugh. You know what your problem is? He said, his tone dripping with disdain. You're selfish. You only think about yourself. You don't support me, Lauren. You don't care about what I need. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Selfish. I repeated, my voice trembling. Jake, I've spent this entire relationship bending over backward to make you happy. I've put your needs ahead of mine so many times I've lost count. And you have the nerve to call me selfish. Yes, he yelled. Because if you really cared about me, you wouldn't have ruined tonight. You would have just paid the bill and moved on. But no, you had to make it a whole thing because God forbid you look bad for once. I felt a sharp pang in my chest, but it wasn't sadness. It was clarity. For months, maybe even years, I'd been making excuses for Jake's behavior. I told myself he wasn't selfish, just thoughtless. That he wasn't manipulative, just bad at communicating. But now, as I looked at him, I realized I'd been lying to myself. This wasn't a one-time thing. This was a pattern, and it wasn't going to change. I can't do this anymore, I said quietly. He frowned, his bravado faltering. What's that supposed to mean? It means you have two choices, I said, meeting his gaze. Either you start respecting my boundaries, really respecting them, or we're done. His eyes widened slightly, as if he couldn't believe what he was hearing. You're not serious, he said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. I've never been more serious, I said. I'm not going to keep fighting to be treated like an equal in my own relationship. You want to keep living like this, fine? But I'm not going to stick around for it. The room fell silent, the weight of my words hanging between us like a storm cloud. Finally, Jake spoke, his voice low and bitter. You're really going to throw everything away over one stupid dinner? This isn't about the dinner, I said, grabbing my bag. It's about respect. And if you can't give me that, then there's nothing left to talk about. I walked out before he could respond, my heart pounding as I headed for the door. When do you decide enough is enough? Would you give someone another chance to change? Or would you walk away for good? Let me know, because for me, this felt like the beginning of the end. The apartment felt quieter than it had in months. It wasn't the kind of peaceful quiet I'd been craving. It was heavy, suffocating, like the weight of everything Jake and I hadn't said was still echoing through the walls. I curled up on the couch, staring blankly at the coffee table where Jake's keys and wallet used to sit. I had told him to leave for the night after our fight. I wasn't even sure if he'd come back, but the thought didn't spark the panic I expected. Instead, it left me with a question I couldn't stop asking myself. How did we get here? The fight at the restaurant hadn't come out of nowhere, no matter how much Jake wanted to act like it had. As I sat there replaying the events of the past year, I began to realize just how much I'd ignored. The first memory that came to mind was the rent. When Jake lost his job last year, I didn't think twice about offering to cover his half of the rent for a few months. I told myself it was temporary, that he just needed a little time to get back on his feet. But a few months turned into 6, and when he finally did find work again, the conversations about splitting bills never resumed. I hadn't wanted to rock the boat, so I let it slide. Then there was the weekend getaway. Jake had planned the trip as a way to reset after a tough few months. I was hesitant about the cost. We weren't exactly flush with cash, but Jake brushed off my concerns. Come on, Lauren, he'd said, his tone half charming, half dismissive. We deserve this. You work hard. Don't overthink it. In the end, I caved. I paid for the hotel, the gas, and most of the meals because Jake forgot to transfer me his half. Looking back, it wasn't about the money. It was about the way he'd made me feel. My concerns weren't valid. My hesitation was just a roadblock to what he wanted. It wasn't just the finances either. Jake had a way of making me feel like my emotions were overreactions. Whenever I brought up something that bothered me, he'd deflect or downplay it. Why do you always make things so dramatic? You're being sensitive again. Can't you just let it go? God, Lauren, not everything has to be a big deal. Those words came flooding back to me now, each one leaving a deeper crack in the foundation of our relationship. I reached for my phone, scrolling through old photos of us. There we were at his birthday last year, laughing over drinks at a rooftop bar. There was the trip to the coast, the weekend getaway that left my wallet empty, but my social media feed full of smiling selfies. In every photo, we looked happy. But now, I couldn't help but wonder if I had mistaken convenience for compatibility. Jake made my life harder, not easier. And the worst part? I let him. The sound of my phone buzzing snapped me out of my thoughts. It was a text from Mia, a mutual friend of ours. Hey Lauren, can we talk? I heard something, and I think you should know. I frowned, my heart sinking. What now? I called her back, my voice tight with nerves. Hey Mia, what's up? There was a pause on the other end of the line before she sighed. Look, I don't want to stir the pot, but Jake's been talking about what happened at the dinner. Of course he has, I muttered, bracing myself. What did he say? He's telling people you humiliated him, Mia said. That you refused to support him on his birthday and made a scene for no reason. He's calling you cheap and kind of painting himself as the victim. I closed my eyes, anger bubbling in my chest. Great, I said bitterly, because that's exactly what I need right now. Lauren, Mia said softly, you don't deserve this. And for what it's worth, I know what really happened. A lot of us do. Jake's just Jake. Her words stayed with me long after we hung up. I wasn't surprised that Jake was spinning the story to make himself look better. That was who he was. Charming, likable, and always the victim when things didn't go his way. But hearing it laid out like that from someone else made me see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about money. It wasn't just about boundaries. It was about respect, or the lack of it. How do you move forward when someone you love doesn't respect you? Would you fight to fix things, or would you let go for your own peace of mind? Let me know, because for me, this was the moment I had to decide if our relationship was worth saving. I met Mia at a cafe downtown the next afternoon. She'd been one of Jake's closest friends before we started dating, and over the years, I'd come to trust her as someone who didn't sugarcoat things. When she texted me, saying she wanted to explain everything in person, I knew it wasn't going to be good. She was already waiting when I arrived, her hands wrapped around a steaming cup of coffee. Hey, I said, sliding into the chair across from her. Hey, she replied, her expression tense. Thanks for meeting me. Of course, I said, though the knot in my stomach told me I wasn't going to like what came next. Mia took a deep breath before launching into it. So, Jake's been talking. A lot. And not in a good way, she said carefully. He's been telling people what happened at the dinner, but his version is skewed. I frowned, already feeling the anger bubbling beneath my skin. What is he saying? She hesitated, clearly trying to find the right words. He's saying you humiliated him in front of everyone. That you refused to pay for the dinner because you're controlling and stingy. I stared at her, my mind racing. Controlling? Stingy? Mia nodded. I don't believe it for a second, obviously. But he's really laying it on thick. He told Max that you ruined his birthday because you're obsessed with power dynamics in the relationship or something. And he's been joking about how you're probably going to make him sign a prenup if you ever get married. I clenched my fists under the table, my heart pounding. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It's not just the money, though, Mia continued. He's telling people you're hard to please, that you're always nitpicking him, and that he's tired of walking on eggshells around you. Her voice softened as she added, Lauren, I don't know what his deal is, but it's not okay. You've done so much for him. Everyone can see it, except, apparently, Jake. I sat back in my chair, the weight of her words settling over me. Jake had always been good at spinning situations to make himself look better, but this felt like a betrayal on a whole new level. Thank you for telling me, I said finally. Mia reached across the table, squeezing my hand. You don't deserve this, she said. And if you ever need backup, I've got your back. That night, I waited for Jake to come home, my mind racing as I rehearsed what I wanted to say. When he finally walked through the door, I could barely contain my frustration. We need to talk, I said, my tone sharp. About what? He asked, shrugging off his jacket. I folded my arms, meeting his gaze. About the things you've been saying to our friends. About me. His expression shifted, his brow furrowing. What are you talking about? Mia told me everything, I said, my voice rising slightly. How you're telling people I'm controlling and stingy. That I humiliated you. That I ruined your birthday because I wouldn't pay for everyone. Do you even hear how ridiculous that sounds? Jake sighed, running a hand through his hair. Oh, come on, Lauren. It's not a big deal. People vent. I was just blowing off steam. I felt my jaw tighten, the anger bubbling over. This isn't venting, Jake. This is you trashing me behind my back to make yourself look better. Do you have any idea how humiliating that is? He crossed his arms, his expression defensive. Well, maybe if you didn't act like such a control freak, I wouldn't have anything to complain about. Control freak? I repeated, incredulous. Jake, this isn't about control. This is about respect. Something you seem completely incapable of giving me. Oh, here we go again, he said, throwing his hands up. You're always making everything about respect. Can't you just let it go for once? No, I can't, I said, my voice steady despite the anger simmering inside me. Because this isn't just about the dinner. It's about every single time you've put your wants ahead of my needs. Every time you've dismissed my feelings or taken advantage of my generosity. And now, instead of owning up to it, you're trying to make me look like the bad guy. I'm done, Jake. I'm done pretending this is okay. He stared at me, stunned into silence. For once, he didn't have a quick retort or a deflecting joke. You're being dramatic, he said finally, though his voice lacked conviction. No, I said firmly. I'm being honest. And I can't keep doing this. I need time to think about whether this relationship is even worth saving. Jake's eyes widened. You're breaking up with me? I'm saying I need space, I replied. Because right now, I don't trust you. And without trust, what's the point? The look on his face was a mixture of shock and disbelief, but I didn't wait for him to respond. I grabbed my keys and walked out the door, my heart pounding as I drove away. What would you do if the person you loved betrayed your trust? Would you give them another chance? Or would you walk away for good? Let me know, because for me, this was the moment everything changed. The first week after walking away from Jake felt surreal. The silence in my apartment, once a source of discomfort, had become a sanctuary. For the first time in years, I wasn't tiptoeing around someone else's moods or bending over backward to keep the peace. I woke up each morning with a sense of calm I hadn't realized I'd been missing. And though the ache of our argument lingered, it was accompanied by something unexpected: relief. The first thing I did was call Sarah, my best friend since college. I'm proud of you, she said over coffee at our favorite cafe. It's about time you put yourself first. I smiled weakly, stirring my latte. It doesn't feel that way yet. It feels empty. That's normal, she said. You've been pouring everything into Jake for so long. It's going to take time to refill your own cup. Her words stuck with me. That night, I pulled out a journal I hadn't touched in years and began writing. At first, it was just a few scattered thoughts, things I'd wanted to say to Jake, but couldn't, moments from our relationship that still hurt to think about. But as the days went on, the entries shifted. I wrote about the things that made me happy. Long walks in the park, trying new recipes, lazy afternoons spent reading. I wrote about the person I wanted to become, someone who valued herself enough to demand the same from others. Therapy was the next step. Dr. Morgan, a therapist recommended by Sarah, greeted me with a warm smile during our first session. Tell me what brought you here, she said, her voice gentle but direct. And so I told her everything. The dinner, the fight, the years of subtle and not so subtle disrespect I'd overlooked because I wanted to believe Jake would change. It sounds like you've been carrying a lot, Dr. Morgan said when I finished. I guess I have, I admitted, but I don't know how to let it go. You start by acknowledging your own worth, she said. You've been prioritizing someone else's needs over your own for so long that you've forgotten how to take care of yourself. This is your chance to rediscover what you want, what you need, and to set boundaries that protect that. Setting boundaries became my mantra. When Jake started texting me, I didn't respond. His first few messages were apologies, short and vague, like he didn't quite know what he was apologizing for. I miss you. Can we talk? I'm sorry about the dinner. Let's work this out. When I didn't reply, the tone shifted. Ignoring me isn't fair, Lauren. So this is how you're going to be? After everything we've been through, I deleted the messages without responding, each one affirming my decision to take a step back. A week later, a package arrived at my door. Inside was a bouquet of roses and a handwritten note. I'm sorry for everything. I know I messed up, but I love you. Please, let's talk. Jake. The roses were beautiful, but they didn't move me. I left them on the counter untouched and spent the evening on a long call with my mom, who'd always had a knack for cutting through my indecision. Do you want him back? She asked bluntly. I don't know, I admitted. I don't want to feel this way anymore. Then focus on healing, she said. If he really loves you, he'll respect that. And if he doesn't, you'll know you made the right choice. Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into the process of rediscovering myself. I started going to yoga classes on Saturday mornings, something I'd always wanted to do but never made time for. I reconnected with old friends, filling my weekends with laughter and conversations that reminded me of who I was before Jake. Slowly, the pieces of myself I thought I'd lost began to reappear. But just as I was starting to feel like I was finally moving forward, Jake reappeared, this time in a way I couldn't ignore. It was a Tuesday afternoon, and I was in the middle of a meeting at work when my coworker poked her head into my office. There's a guy here asking for you, she said. He says it's urgent. My heart sank. I knew who it was before she even said his name. I stepped out into the lobby, and there he was, looking disheveled and desperate. "Lauren," he said, his voice pleading, "I need to talk to you. Please." What do you do when the past shows up, demanding a second chance? Would you hear him out, or would you stand firm in your decision to move on? Let me know, because for me, this was the moment I had to decide if I was ready to let him back in or finally close the door for good. The tension in the air was palpable as Jake and I sat across from each other at the cafe. This wasn't where I'd pictured our final conversation, but after his surprise visit to my office, I knew I couldn't keep avoiding him. Jake had insisted on meeting somewhere neutral, somewhere we could talk without distractions. I reluctantly agreed, more for closure than anything else. "So," he said, leaning forward, his hands clasped tightly around his coffee mug. "Thanks for coming." I nodded, not trusting myself to speak just yet. "I know I screwed up," Jake began, his voice low and heavy with emotion. "I've had a lot of time to think about everything, and I get it now. I was selfish. I took you for granted, and I didn't realize how much you were doing for me until you were gone." His words hung in the air, and for a brief moment, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe he really had changed. Maybe this was the wake-up call he needed. But then he continued. "I mean, it wasn't all my fault," he said, his tone shifting slightly. "You're not perfect either, Lauren. You could be really controlling sometimes, and I felt like I couldn't do anything right around you. There was the same pattern, the same deflection." Jake's version of an apology always came with a catch. "Jake," I said, my voice steady, "this isn't about me being perfect. This is about you taking responsibility for your actions. You can't just say, 'I'm sorry,' and expect me to forget everything." "I'm not trying to make excuses," he said quickly. "I'm just saying, we both made mistakes. But I love you, Lauren. I don't want to lose you over one bad night." "One bad night?" I repeated, incredulous. "Jake, this isn't about one bad night. This is about years of you putting yourself first and expecting me to pick up the pieces. This is about me feeling like I was in a relationship with someone who didn't respect me." "I do respect you," he insisted, his eyes wide and earnest. I didn't realize how much I was asking of you. But I get it now. I swear I'll do better." I wanted to believe him. I really did. But as I looked at him, sitting there with that same pleading expression he'd used so many times before, I couldn't shake the feeling that nothing had really changed. "What does better even mean to you, Jake?" I asked, leaning back in my chair. "Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you're just saying what you think I want to hear." He frowned, his frustration bubbling to the surface. "What do you want me to say, Lauren? That I'm a terrible person? That I don't deserve you? I already told you I'm sorry. What else can I do?" "You can show me," I said simply. "With actions, not words. But honestly, I don't think you're ready for that." Jake's jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he might argue. But then he leaned back, running a hand through his hair. "This is really it, isn't it?" he said quietly. I nodded, feeling the lump rise in my throat. "Yeah, I think it is." The silence between us was deafening. Part of me wanted to take it all back, to tell him we could try again, that maybe this time would be different. But deep down, I knew the truth. Jake wasn't a bad person, but he wasn't the person I needed him to be. "I don't hate you," I said finally. "I want you to know that. I think part of me will always care about you. But I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pouring everything into a relationship that drains me." He nodded slowly, his eyes glassy. "I really did love you, Lauren." "I know," I said, my voice breaking slightly. "But sometimes love isn't enough." As I stood to leave, Jake didn't try to stop me. He just sat there, staring down at his coffee, like it held all the answers he couldn't find. Walking out of that cafe felt like stepping into a different world. The air was crisp, the sunlight warm against my skin, but inside, I felt a mix of emotions I couldn't quite name. Was this the right choice? Could I have done more? Or was I finally doing enough for myself? Let me know, because for me, this was the hardest decision I'd ever made. But it was also the first one I'd made entirely for me. Months later, the person staring back at me in the mirror didn't look so different, but she felt like someone entirely new. I'd spent so long trying to make someone else happy, contorting myself into what I thought Jake wanted, biting my tongue when he overstepped, sacrificing my own needs for the sake of peace. But now, standing here in my apartment, the space fully my own again, I felt the quiet satisfaction of reclaiming my life. The air felt lighter. My mind, too. At first, the aftermath of the breakup had been messy. For weeks, I wrestled with doubt. Had I been too harsh? Was there a version of events where I could have forgiven Jake and moved forward with him? Those thoughts would creep in late at night, their whispers loudest when the world was still and my mind wandered to the what-ifs. But every time they came, I reminded myself of the reality I'd lived. Jake hadn't just disrespected me. He made it clear he valued his comfort and ego over our partnership. That wasn't love. Therapy had been a godsend during those early weeks. Dr. Morgan didn't just help me process the breakup. She helped me recognize patterns I hadn't even been aware of. It's not just about Jake, she'd said during one session. It's about why you accepted behavior that hurt you. Why you felt like his needs always had to come first. Those words hit me hard. She was right. I had to take responsibility for my part, too. I'd allowed Jake to cross boundaries because I thought that's what love required. But love isn't supposed to cost you your self-respect. I started prioritizing things that made me feel good. Simple things I neglected while putting Jake's happiness first. I joined a book club and met people who shared my love for stories. I started running again, not to chase a fitness goal, but because it made me feel strong and free. And I reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in years, filling my weekends with laughter and warmth instead of tension and compromise. Slowly, I began to feel whole again. One afternoon, Sarah and I were sitting in the park, watching the ducks float lazily across the pond. "You seem different," she said, taking a sip of her iced coffee. "Different how?" I asked, tilting my head. "Lighter," she said with a grin. "Like you finally stopped carrying all that dead weight." I laughed, shaking my head. "It's not that simple. But it kind of is," she said. "You stopped settling, Lauren. That's a big deal." Her words stayed with me. Jake, of course, hadn't stayed quiet. A few weeks after the breakup, he'd started texting again. At first, they were the same half-hearted apologies I'd grown used to. "I miss you. I still love you. Can we talk? Please?" When I didn't respond, the messages took on a different tone. "Ignoring me is childish, Lauren. You're making a huge mistake." I deleted them all without replying. I knew what he was doing, trying to reel me back in, not because he'd changed, but because he didn't like losing. The last message came one rainy Friday evening. "You'll regret this one day." I stared at the screen, the words sitting there like a dare. For a moment, I considered responding, telling him exactly why I didn't regret a thing. But then I realized that replying would only give him what he wanted, my attention. Instead, I deleted the message and turned off my phone. Jake's opinion of me didn't matter anymore. Now, standing in my apartment, the storm outside battering against the windows, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt, of sadness for what could have been. But they didn't consume me the way they used to. I had grown in ways I never thought possible. Was walking away from Jake easy? Not at all. But was it worth it? Absolutely. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that teach you the most about yourself. I learned that love isn't supposed to be about sacrifice. It's supposed to be about balance, respect, and mutual care. So, let me ask you, is it better to hold on to relationships for the sake of love, or is self-respect worth the cost of walking away? For me, the answer was clear. Because at the end of the day, the best relationship you'll ever have is the one you have with yourself.